Nowadays, it is possible to speak of a demonic nature of the economy, because in both individual and collective life, the economic factor is the most important, real, and decisive one. Moreover, the tendency to converge every value and interest on the economic and productive plane is not perceived by Western man as an unprecedented aberration, but instead as something normal and natural, and not as an eventual necessity, but as something that must be accepted, willed, developed, and praised. As I have said before, when the right and primacy of interests higher than those of the socio-economic plane are not upheld, there is no hierarchy, and even if there is one, it is only a counterfeit. This is also true when a higher authority is not accorded to those men, groups, and bodies representing and defending these values and interests. In this case, an economic era is already, by definition, a fundamentally anarchical and anti-hierarchical era. It represents a subversion of the normal order, the materialization and the soullessness of all the domains of life that characterize it, divest of any higher meaning all those problems and conflicts that are regarded as important within it. This subversive character is found both in Marxism and its apparent nemesis, modern capitalism. Thus, it is absurd and deplorable for those who pretend to represent the political right to fail to leave the dark and small circle that is determined by the demonic power of the economy, a circle including capitalism, Marxism, and all the intermediate economic degrees. This should be firmly upheld by those who today are taking a stand against the forces of the left. Nothing is more evident than that modern capitalism is just as subversive as Marxism. The materialistic view of life on which both systems are based is identical. Both of their ideals are qualitatively identical, including the premises connected to a world, the center of which is constituted of technology, science, production, productivity, and consumption. And as long as we only talk about economic classes, profit, salaries, and production, and as long as we believe that real human progress is determined by a particular system of distribution of wealth and goods, and that, generally speaking, human progress is measured by the degree of wealth or indigence, then we are not even close to what is essential, even though new theories beyond Marxism and capitalism might be formulated. The starting point should be, instead, a firm rejection of the principle formulated by Marxism, which summarizes the entire subversion at work today. The economy is our destiny. We must declare in an uncompromising way that in a normal civilization, the economy and economic interests, understood as the satisfaction of material needs and their more or less artificial appendices, have always played and always will play a subordinated function. We must also uphold that beyond the economic sphere, an order of higher political, spiritual, and heroic values has to emerge, an order that neither knows nor tolerates merely economic classes, and does not know the division between capitalists and proletarians, an order solely in terms of which are to be defined the things worth living and dying for. We must also uphold the need for a true hierarchy and for different dignities with a higher function of power installed at the top, namely the imperium. But where is the battle waged today in these terms? The social question and various political problems are increasingly losing any higher meaning and are being defined on the basis of the most primitive conditions of physical existence, conditions that are then made absolute and removed from any higher concern. The notion of justice is reduced to this or that system of distribution of economic goods. The notion of civilization is measured mostly by that of production, and the focus of people's attention tends to be on topics such as production, work, productivity, economic classes, salaries, private or public property, exploitation of the workers, and special interest groups. According to supporters of capitalism and to Marxists, nothing else exists or matters in this world. According to Marxists, everything that exists is regarded as a superstructure and as a derivative. Supporters of free market economy are not inclined to be as drastic, though their standard and main concern is always the economy. All this is proof of the true pathology of our civilization. The economic factor exercises a hypnosis and a tyranny over modern man. And, as often occurs in hypnosis, what the mind focuses on eventually becomes real. Modern man is making possible what every normal and complete civilization has always regarded as an aberration or as a bad joke, namely that the economy and the social problem in terms of the economy are his destiny. Thus, in order to posit a new principle, what is needed is not to oppose one economic formula with another, but instead to radically change attitudes, to reject without compromise the materialistic premises from which the economic factor has been perceived as absolute. What must be questioned is not the value of this or that economic system, but the value of the economy itself. Thus, despite the fact that the antithesis between capitalism and Marxism dominates the background of recent times, it must be regarded as a pseudo-antithesis. In free market economies, as well as in Marxist societies, the myth of production and its corollaries, for example, standardization, monopolies, cartels, technocracy, are subject to the hegemony of the economy, becoming the primary factor on which the material conditions of existence are based. Both systems regard as backward or as underdeveloped those civilizations that do not amount to civilizations based on labor and production, namely those civilizations that, luckily for themselves, have not yet been caught up in the feverish industrial exploitation of every natural resource, the social and productive enslavement of all human possibilities, and the exaltation of technical and industrial standards. In other words, those civilizations that still enjoy a certain space and relative freedom. Thus, the true antithesis is not between capitalism and Marxism, but between a system in which the economy rules supreme, no matter in what form, and a system in which the economy is subordinated to extra economic factors within a wider and more complex order, such as to bestow a deep meaning upon human life and foster the development of its highest possibilities. This is the premise for a true restorative reaction beyond left and right, beyond capitalism's abuses and Marxist subversion. The necessary conditions are an inner detoxification, a becoming normal again, normal in the higher meaning of the term, and a renewed capability to differentiate between base and noble interests. No intervention from the outside can help. Any external action, at best, might accompany this process. In order to resolve the problem, it is necessary, first of all, to reject the neutral interpretation of the economic phenomenon proper to a deviated sociology. The very economic life has a body and soul of its own, and inner moral factors have always determined its meaning and spirit. Such spirit, as Sombart has clearly shown, should be distinguished from the various forms of production, distribution, and organization of economic goods. It may vary depending on individual instances, and it bestows a very different scope and meaning on the economic factor. The pure homo economicus is a fiction, or the byproduct of an evidently degenerated specialization. Thus, in every normal civilization, a purely economic man, that is the one who sees the economy not as an order of means, but rather as an order of ends to which he dedicates his main activities, was always rightly regarded as a man of lower social extraction, lower in a spiritual sense, and furthermore in a social or political one. In essence, it is necessary to return to normalcy, to restore the natural dependency of the economic factor on inner moral factors, and to act upon them. Once this is acknowledged, it will be easy to recognize the inner causes in the actual world, which have the economy as their common denominator, that preclude any solution that does not translate into a steeper fall to a lower level. I have previously suggested that the uprising of the masses has mainly been caused by the fact that every social difference has been reduced to those that exist between mere economic classes, and by the fact that under the aegis of anti-traditional liberalism, property and wealth, once free from any bond or higher value, have become the only criteria of social differences. However, beyond the strict limitations that were established within the overall hierarchical system prior to the ascent of the economy, the superiority and the right of a class as a merely economic class may rightly be contested in the name of elementary human values. And it was precisely here that the subversive ideology introduced itself, by making an anomalous and degenerative situation into an absolute one, and acting as if nothing else had previously existed or could exist outside economic classes, or besides external and unfair social conditions that are determined by wealth alone. However, all this is false, since such conditions could develop only within a truncated society. Only in such a society may the concepts of capitalist and proletarian be defined. These terms lack any foundation in a normal civilization, because in such a civilization, the counterpart constituted by extra economic values portrays the corresponding human types as something radically different from what today is categorized as capitalist or proletarian. Even in the domain of the economy, a normal civilization provides specific justification for certain differences in condition, dignity, and function. Moreover, in the contemporary chaos, it is also necessary to acknowledge what is caused by an ideological infection. It is not entirely correct to say that Marxism arose and took hold because there was a real social question that needed to be addressed. At best, this may have been the case during the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. The opposite is true, to wit, that for the most part the social question gains precedence in today's world only as a result of the presence of Marxism. The social question artificially arises through the concerted efforts of agitators, those who are engaged in rekindling class consciousness. Lenin did not assign to the Communist Party only the task of supporting workers' movements where they arose spontaneously, but rather the task of creating and organizing them everywhere and by every means. Marxism gives rise to the proletariat and class mentality where it previously did not exist, stirring excitement and creating resentment and dissatisfaction in those societies where the individuals still lived in the station allotted to them by life. In those societies, an individual contained his need and aspirations within natural limits. He did not yearn to become different from what he was, and thus he was innocent of that Entfremdung, alienation, decried by Marxism. Incidentally, we should recall that Marxism proposes to overcome this alienation through something worse, namely the integration, or we should say disintegration, of the person into a collective entity, for example, the people or the party. I am not espousing an obscurantism for the benefit of the ruling classes, as I have stated previously. I dispute the superiority and the rights of a merely economic class living in a materialistic fashion. Nevertheless, we need to side against the idea or myth of so-called social progress, which is another of the many pathological fixations of the economic era in general, and not the legacy of leftist movements alone. To this effect, the eschatological views of Marxism do not differ very much from the Western views of prosperity. Both Weltanschauungen, worldviews, essentially coincide, as do their practical applications. In both Marxism and free market economies, we find the same materialistic, anti-political, and social view, detaching the social order and people from any higher order and higher goal, positing what it is useful as the only purpose understood in a physical, vegetative, and earthly sense, by turning the useful into a criterion of progress. The values proper to every traditional structure are inverted. In fact, we should not forget that the law, meaning, and sufficient reason for these structures have always consisted in references for man to something beyond himself and beyond the economy, wealth, or material poverty. All these things have only a secondary importance. Thus, it can legitimately be claimed that the so-called improvement of social conditions should be regarded not as good, but as evil, when its price consists of the enslavement of the single individual to the productive mechanism and to the social conglomerate, or in the degradation of the state to the state based on work, and the degradation of society to consumer society, or in the elimination of every qualitative hierarchy, or in the atrophy of every spiritual sensibility and every heroic attitude. Hegel wrote, "Happiness is not to be found in the history of the world, in the sense of material comfort and social prosperity. Even the few happy periods found here and there are like white pages." But even at an individual level, the qualities that matter the most in a man and make him who he is often arise in harsh circumstances, and even in conditions of indigence and injustice, since they represent a challenge to him, testing his spirit. What a sad contrast it is when the human animal is granted a maximum of comfort, an equal share in a mindless and bovine happiness. An easy and comfortable life filled with gadgets, radios, and TV programs, planes, Hollywood, sports arenas, and popular culture at the level of Reader's Digest. Again, spiritual values and the higher degree of human perfection have nothing to do with either the presence or the absence of socioeconomic prosperity.